Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be exploring the Capricorn full moon of the 13th of July in terms of Universal Central Time 2022. Now on the screen now I'm sharing where it's going to occur and at what time in your location. Now, as you can see, in terms of London, New York, Los Angeles, it's the 13th. In terms of New Delhi and Sydney, it's the 14th. What is a Capricorn full moon? That's what I'm going to be tackling first of all. But then, so you know how this video is going to be structured, I'm then going to go on and share with you on screen a simple birth chart wheel, thinking of the Zodiac as starting with the sign of Aries. So that means this event occurs in house 4 in terms of the sun, and the moon is in house 10 in terms of Capricorn. But please stay with me, because then I'm going to share an event chart which looks at the more specific astrology, and the ascendant for that is in fact in the sign of Sagittarius. And also, interestingly, the moon and its conjunction with Pluto, which is very powerful, is in house 1, but the sun and Mercury, which are in a conjunction in Cancer, are in house 7. So please stay with me while I go through that, because it does bring a much deeper dimension to understanding the impact this will have upon us all. And then finally, as ever, I'm going to give you each of the 12 zodiac signs which you can watch and relate to through your sun or your ascendant or both. Now, if you are new to my channel, thank you so much for watching. I'd be most grateful if you would subscribe. I've crashed through the 100,000k barrier, and now, understandably, after all the illnesses I've had over the years, now I'm eager to get to 101,000 subscribers. So if you've yet to do so, I'd be grateful if you clicked or tapped on the bell notification symbol. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for all your support. Now, if you would like to embrace more serious astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place, I can give you a roadmap that can guide you for the rest of your life. But also, in my special package of 30% off, you can get a 12-month personal forecast. Please see the link beneath this video. These are totally unique to each person that I produce them for. So what does a Capricorn full moon represent? Well, the sun, of course, in Cancer is all about those things that we relate to with Cancer, to do with security, a degree of leadership, because it's a cardinal sign, and it's about nurture, shelter, security. It can be about issues to do with where we live, how we live there, and with whom. But when the moon is facing the sun, the moon is at its weakest point in its annual journey through these series of full moons. And the reason for that is that the moon is in detriment in the sign of Capricorn. So just so you know, the moon governs the sign of Cancer. It's not so comfortable. It's known as being in its full in the sign of Scorpio. And it's exalted in Taurus, but in detriment in Capricorn. So those are the essential dignities of the moon. So the sign of Capricorn is, of course, the 10th zodiac sign, and it's governed by the rather cool and sometimes detached energies of Saturn. So Saturn is chilling down the more human need that the moon brings to us in the way that it helps us to find that sense of stability and the ease, really, to express how we feel about things. So it's possible that the more material influence of Capricorn, and people who have the moon in Capricorn are usually quite caught up with their physical security as much as their emotional security. At this point in the journey, it may be that more material and physical plane that comes through Capricorn, because it's very much to do with how things have been for a very long time. It's innately conservative. On the other side of the heavens, the sun in Cancer understandably wants to do what it can to protect us. So we've got a bit of a conflict going on. So making sure that the emotional side of our life works with the physical, practical side is going to be the challenge over the next 2 weeks. But on the screen now, I'm sharing with you that overall, quite simple horoscope wheel. And you can see that right at the top in house 10, there is the moon and Pluto. Pluto in retrograde. But you can see in house 4, Cancer, there is the sun and Mercury. Now, when you put the sun and Pluto in opposition in a natal horoscope, it can make people very trenchant in their opinions. And if they have something they want to say, they can do so with a lot of vigour, but also a lot of emotional force. And also having Mercury, the planet of ideas, in the watery sign of Cancer can make us a little more subjective. And that's also in an opposition with the moon and Pluto. So I think over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see a lot of intensity around emotions linked to the physical plane. Now, obviously, there is a lot of concern about the rising energy prices. Food and fuel security have become massive topics this year, as I did predict last autumn, because of the collection of energy that has been building up in the sign of Taurus. Of course, we've had Uranus there for some time, joined by the North Node on the 18th of January, and more recently, we also have Mars there as well. And you can see those together in house 2. So I think we're going to see quite a lot of emotional exchanges, but where people feel that they're not getting the support, guidance or leadership, whether it's in a business environment or in a governmental one. So expect to see quite a lot of industrial disputes, I feel, ramp up over this next fortnight. So that's almost certain to be an issue. Now, I'm going to share with you on the screen now the event chart based on Universal Central Time, as it always is with me. Other astrologers may base this event on where they're located, you know, whether it's in Sydney, Delhi, New York or whatever. But for me, based on Greenwich in London, which is the centre of time, we see the ascendant is at 28 degrees and 4 in Sagittarius, which is very much about international affairs, but you can see that ascendant is very late. Therefore, the overlap for most of the first house, and in fact, pretty well half the way through into the sign of Aquarius, because we've got an interception. The first house is very elongated, and it means that the moon and Pluto in that conjunction are in the first house, even though in the overall chart, Capricorn represents house 10. So the first house is very much about instant action. It's more about impulse. It's more about feeling something, sensing it and going with it quickly. And of course, the planet Pluto is the power broker of the heavens. So we're intensifying our emotional responses. Now, the Sun and Mercury, ironically, in house 7, because at the end of the day, the Sun is what we all rely upon, isn't it, really, to function in this universe. But in this context, the Sun and Mercury are in house 7, which is really promoting the concept of discussion, relating, trying to get to points of agreement. But I think the fierce combination of the moon and Pluto is going to turn up the emotional temperature a lot. So people are really going to be quite trenchant about where they feel that their physical circumstances are not fair, and they're not going to hold back in conveying their dissatisfaction and asking the sun to find the solutions to try to make it right. But of course, we're living in very complex times. Now you can see that house 4, which is how we live, where we live, we do have Mars, Uranus and the node. Now it just so happens that the node and Uranus are actually in a pretty brilliant angle with this particular event, suggesting that we may have to continue to be quite enterprising in order to drive down our costs or consumption, and therefore ease the weight of the financial burden. But with having Mars right on the cusp of the 4th house with Uranus there as well, does suggest instability around homes and our need for shelter and security. So I think we could see a big reset come in around the property market. Now this could be that it's going to start in certain localities. It may begin in the southern hemisphere, it may begin in the northern hemisphere, but I think if I gave a standout prediction for this particular event, it would be a reset about property prices. Now, property prices throughout the world have been growing at an exponential rate, mainly because land's become so valuable, but also because a lot of people have been working from home during COVID, and that's a different cultural way of living. So homes need to be a bit bigger, they need to be more adaptable to deal with that. But you can see that Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, which obviously governs structures, that's in house 2, and that therefore can be restrictive, and it is in a square with both Uranus and the North Node in house 4. So I think the inference is pretty clear there. Also, Neptune does forge a quite beautiful link with the Sun, which can be very spiritual and suggest that it's important to embrace what we have and not only be focused on what we don't have or how more difficult the material world is becoming for us. But we do have a square in this chart between Neptune and Venus. So I feel that Venus in the 6th house is asking us to keep it real around money, but Neptune in the 2nd house of money can create a swirling mist of confusion. So we've got to be utterly realistic. So I think there's a real potential for a big reset or the end of the price surge that's just been so absolutely consistent over the last couple of years. Whether I'm working with clients in the States, Australia or England, this has been a universal pattern. House prices have gone up significantly. So this chart is asking us to be more flexible in our approach, also appreciate what we have, but also it's going to see a lot of very intense exchanges of opinion. I think that's absolutely the key. And because home is so important for most of us in terms of, where we find safety, where we find peace, where we relax, where we have our family life, where we feel most emotionally satisfied. Any part of your existence and mine which is not settled in those areas is likely to be somewhat turbulent over this next 2-week period. Now, I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs now to give you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of the Sun or the Ascendant. Now, obviously, Aries, you fit that wider world that I shared earlier. And for you, your house 1, the moon in house 10. So how will that manifest itself for you? Well, I will tell you that even if you're quite a reserved Aries, it will be very difficult to disguise how you feel about things over the next 2 weeks. And that's because the moon in the 10th house is quite visible and can be quite volatile with Pluto in the mix. So, if you need to have a conversation with an employer, a family member, about a sensitive issue, whether it's your package, your remuneration, the amount of work you do, whether you feel really appreciated, the Sun in Cancer, or whether you feel dissatisfied. So I think balancing that work-home scenario, which, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but for all of us, we're trying to do it all the time. But I think that's going to be particularly important for you over the next fortnight. However, there is a big takeout for you, and that is that Jupiter is in your sign and it's forging a semi-sextile to Mars, which is in your sector of Loot. So I think enterprise, Jupiter's about growth and about self-confidence, and Mars is about action. So there's a nice 30-degree link just under between them, which means that if you go with your gut feeling on something which feels right, it could well pay off handsomely for you over this next 2 weeks. Now, Taurus, for you, the moon's in the ninth house of your situation, along with Pluto, which has been there since 2008. And during that period of time, you've obviously had Uranus move into your sign, along with the North Node earlier this year. And all of that's given you much more devilment when it comes to changing things up, not necessarily just maintaining the status quo, which you do have a real preference for because it gives you the very security that the moon's so linked to. And remember, your sign is where the moon is exalted, so it loves being in your sign, so you have a real appreciation of home and security. But in this particular event, I think it's about ideas. So you could find yourself having some quite heated exchanges over the next 2 weeks, especially if you want to make your life more varied or spontaneous, bring a greater sense of unpredictability to your routines. The moon often wants us to have a degree of certainty, but I actually feel that you may be wanting to push the envelope a little bit, particularly with Mars and Uranus and the North Node all in your sign. So expect to be more provocative with your ideas or your mode of expression over this next 2 weeks. And it could see you in some verbal arm wrestles with some people. But if you do have an exchange of views, do give yourself the opportunity to absorb the other person's ideas, even if it's not necessarily in agreement with yours. Because with reflection, and remember Pluto's about transformation, so the ninth house is about growth and higher spiritual values. So you could have quite an intense discussion all the way to an argument, but actually there may be a segment of the information that's shared that could be incredibly valuable to your evolution as a person. So I wouldn't be too dogmatic is basically what I'm saying, but at the same time you obviously have to defend your principles and the ideas that guide you. Now Gemini, for you, pardon me, the Sun and Mercury, your ruler, house 2, everyday finance. The position of the Moon and Pluto, house 8. Now there's a Scorpionic echo there because Pluto is the higher octave ruler of Scorpio. So ever since 2008, you have had in tandem with your very mercurial energies, the deep evolving and penetrating energies of Pluto working their way into your consciousness. It could have had an impact on your sex life, on how you've managed your business finances, on property matters, where you're more invested with people or not. You could have seen quite a lot of change, I think. Some things have come, some things have gone. There may have been some painful losses. But having the moon on Pluto in that area gives you awesome depth of understanding. So even though your ruler Mercury on the sun can give you that ordinary bubbliness, which is just part and parcel of who you are, you're actually on the back of this particular full moon able to understand more deeply what's really valuable to you. And it might not just be in the financial realm. Then again, if that's very important to you at the moment, you could really make progress, I think, around your financial situation as long as you stay ahead of the trends, the curve. And with that gathering of energy in your 12th house, Mars, Uranus, the node, listen to your deepest gut instincts to guide you. They are going to be important. But Jupiter in your 11th house suggests that there could be some connections that you're making that are very, very helpful to you. Now, Cancer, of course, for you, this event occurs in your sign. So how is it going to manifest itself? Well, I think someone's going to challenge you in the next couple of weeks, Cancer, and I don't think you're going to like it one little bit. Someone may push back about the way that you express yourself or the way you like to feel in charge of situations. Now, some people may be quite happy to play the supporting act in your play, but if someone feels that you've been overstepping the mark in terms of wanting to dominate, especially at home, there could be a pushback. Now that's one set of potentials. The other potential could be that you're the person who is using your intuition, your kindness, and your natural nurturing energies to support somebody else, but you're not getting necessarily much back. And if that is the case, it could be you who is more trenchant in expressing your disapproval. So I think some kind of issue around the give and get around relationships, either from you or to you, is going to be the core of what this full moon is going to be for you over the next 2 weeks. But of course, your nature generally doesn't like direct confrontation. But if you go back to that big eclipse series that we had a few years ago between the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, this is like a mini me, because of course we had Saturn, Pluto, all together along with Jupiter in the sign of Capricorn, faced up by the full and new moons in that series. So you had a bit of a taste of this a few years ago, and I think really and truly, if you're someone who does assume that others will bend to your will, particularly within the family, someone, as I say, may articulate an objection. They may do it extremely politely, delicately, or it could be more forceful because Pluto is in the mix. But then it may be you who needs to stand in your power and stand up to someone who may be taking your goodwill and physical and emotional support somewhat for granted. Now that brings us to Leo. For you, Leo, this is quite a complex full moon because it occurs in house 6, which is about everyday practicalities, but it means the Sun and Mercury are therefore in your 12th house, which is where we reflect. So the Moon and Pluto could see you needing to deal with something that's quite intense around the practical part of your world, you know, whether it's work, maybe an appointment, maybe it could be to do with an animal, it may be to do with a work matter, to be honest, the 6th house. But the 12th house is where you may have a greater need to cocoon yourself away and, you know, be more reflective. You may even find yourself reminiscing quite strongly on the back of this particular event. Now, ironically for you, with Mars, Uranus and the node right at the top of your horoscope, they can help you to articulate your charisma and your talents in a very visible way. But the Sun and Mercury are almost asking you to have a rest from the limelight. And then the Moon and Pluto are saying, well, that's all very well. We've got to crack on with these essential tasks quickly. And it could be in supporting somebody else who's going through it, just at a time when you're maybe feeling somewhat vulnerable. But I think that the fact that there is so much going on in your 10th house, once the Sun moves into your sign, that's going to really open up so many windows of opportunity for you. And in fact, as we go into August, you will have both the Sun and Mercury in your sign. And in fact, Mercury makes way on the 4th to be replaced by Venus. So a very charismatic month is in store for you, potentially in August. Are some challenges through Saturn. But in this particular phase of this month, I feel that you're just working a few things out, but just when you want a bit of space, you may have those more practical things to attend to. Which brings us to Virgo. Now, the Moon and Pluto are in house 5. That's about love, laughter, warmth, affection, creativity, self-expression, the lust for life. You know, if you have children, their adventures and activities can be particularly exciting for you over the next few weeks. But with the Sun and Mercury, your ruler, in the 11th house, that's the sector of the collective. The 5th house is much more to do with you, the individual. One of the things that could come up from this particular full moon is that you could start to push back against people wanting you to support them quite so much. And the reason for that is that with Mars, Uranus and the North Node in house 9 for you, that's all about exploration and adventure and freedom. So time management and juggling between maybe groups of friends or individuals, or if you've got a growing or evolving love relationship, how do you deal with that in terms of other commitments? So managing your time can be an acute issue over the next couple of weeks, or there can be some powerful emotional dynamics. Maybe some friends don't quite like a partner, or maybe you don't have a partner but you'd like to have one, and you feel that one of your friends is rather dominating. But with all that energy in the sign of Taurus, your sister earth sign, finding the ways to create your own authentic, that's not to say you're not authentic already, but Uranus pushes us to be even more daring, to be even more in touch with the truth of who we are. So in other words, not being so focused on the needs of others and a bit more focused on your own needs in a just way, not a selfish way, means that you may want to rebalance certain commitments, certain involvements, to make sure that the fifth house energy of the moon and Pluto, which is where you want to dazzle and gain admiration, gets some of your, gives you some oxygen, and that 11th house energy of relating to people in general, you're nurturing it, but you're not dominated by it. Now Libra, for you, the Sun and Mercury is house 10, which is all about success, goals and ambitions. So you know what I've been saying about Pluto for a long time now, and I'm sorry if it does sound like a bit of a stuck record, but I was thinking about Pluto. As you know, I have a Libra ascendant at 23 degrees, and I was thinking about the impact that Pluto had had on my life, which is quite incredible, how it sort of crashed through my ascendant, and then it's crashed through my Mars-Saturn conjunction. That's really tough. And then it's gone conjunct my Mercury, and then my Venus-Mars midpoint, which is probably, to be honest, when Elisa and I got together. So that was a very good transformation. And of course, I've kept saying to you that if you're later on in Libra, you know, the last couple of years have been really tough. If you're Libran energy or Libran position, earlier, you've kind of gone through the worst. So it depends where you are in Libra, but this fourth house energy around home, family, emotion is going to be burning hot. And yes, you want success, but you also want people to recognize your emotional responses. You want people to tune into you. This is quite a mighty full moon for Libran folks. So trying to find, you know, it's very similar to Aries really in terms of the work-life balance. It's just in the flip form. So for you, the moon and Pluto are in a much more sensitive location because, of course, the moon in house 4 is very moon-like. It's about nurture, it's about family matters, but there could be some big transformations. If you're wanting to move, I think the next 2 weeks could be actually very exciting, and some good news can break for you because Uranus and the node are in a conjunction in the part of your horoscope, the 8th house, to do with transformations, and that can be to do with long-term finance, like a mortgage. So they're linking very well with both the moon, Pluto, the sun and Mercury. So I think there is the potential for some kind of big change or transformation, or some news about an addition to the family, which could be really exciting. It's not going to be dull. Now Scorpio, of course, Pluto is your modern higher octave ruler. We already know the moon's not so happy in your sign, but for you, the moon and Pluto are in house 3. Everyday conversation, people in your neighbourhood, siblings, can be the more technological side of life, can be things like domestic appliances, third house, electricity, Hoover, vacuum. Sorry, I shouldn't use. Other brands are available. So yes, the vacuum cleaner may go on the blink or need servicing. And then on the other side of the heavens, the sun in your sister water sign is in house 9 along with Mercury. I think you're going to travel over the next couple of weeks, and someone close to you may not necessarily agree with your choice of destination. Or if you're someone who's quite a restless spirit, you may want to do something that's much more physical. So that may mean doing something more adventurous, being more spontaneous. you're a fixed sign, so you like things to be fairly well worked out in terms of schedules, but you may actually do something really quite helter-skelter, and some kind of competitiveness could appeal to you. You may actually find yourself having, I don't mean an argument in a horrible way, but you could find yourself having some debates into the wee small hours, as some astrologers would say. So you could find yourself having, some light-hearted banter in a pub, or you could have a more serious conversation about something that you feel much more invested in. So that's possible. Travel's possible. Be more active, be more restless. But I think that your ruler Mars is in your 7th house, and the 7th house position of Mars can be quite argumentative, to be honest. If people have Mars on the 7th house cusp in their natal chart, they find it difficult to forge relationships. It can be very competitive. It's great if you want to do something like play tennis or badminton, or pit yourself against a rival at work and really go flat out to win. Mars on the 7th house cusp is great for that. Not so great for swallowing our pride a little bit and entering into a spirit of give and take. So I think generally for you, I think there could be some tensions on this full moon, especially if your ideas are really not meshing with someone immediately around you or who you encounter on a daily basis. And I think you can argue for fun, but make sure it is fun. So that brings us to Sagittarius. So the Sun and Mercury, house 8, longer term finance. The Moon and Pluto in house 2, the immediate financial reality. You might find, if your financial situation is not very strong at the moment, and obviously a lot of us are dealing with a lot of increases, but if it's something more structural, or you're not feeling that you can express yourself, this ascendant is in Sagittarius, so very important for you to be able to be a free spirit and be quite individualistic. But in so being, you're not really getting a return on your investment, I think you could feel quite low about it over the next couple of weeks. You could sort of beat yourself up a bit psychologically wise. Maybe there's going to be quite a deep, torturous conversation that you're going to have. But for other archers, it could be, sorry, I couldn't resist that. It could be that actually this is a full moon which sees a significant financial breakthrough. Now you may feel typical astrologer hedging his bets. Well, it's because astrology doesn't work in one specific direction. It's very complex. Pluto can reveal secrets, but it can be about power. The moon is obviously about emotional security, but in the 2nd house, it can see us much more conscious of our self-worth. I can only tell you what the astrology is telling me, and having Mercury on the other side of the heavens suggests that you're wanting to be very entrepreneurial, but if it's not possible because your physical resources or circumstances don't allow you to be a bit more free-spirited around how you marshal your finances, I think it can sort of irk a little bit. But just be aware that the part of fortune is in a conjunction with Venus on the opposite side of the heavens, and also you can see that whilst Venus is in a square with Neptune, which can be very idealistic, Jupiter, your ruler, is in your sister fire sign of Aries, and that's a great place for risk. So if you have got some money behind you, or you've got an idea that you can work with that doesn't necessarily incur a great deal of startup costs, you could actually be very, very enterprising. And the opposition between the Sun and Pluto and Mercury and Pluto can give you a lot of drive, a lot of grit to overcome obstacles, to demonstrate to people just how worthy you are. So very, very powerful full moon for you, to be honest. This brings us to Capricorn. Now for you, of course, this event occurs in your sign, so it's about relationships all day long. If you're not happy in a relationship of any kind, be with a colleague, it could be with a partner if you have one, it may be with an offspring, it may be with a friend, maybe with a line manager, I think it's going to reach quite a critical point over this next 2-week period. Now you're someone who can show tremendous stamina, and also you're very realistic, and that's one of your great gifts. But I think it's possible that you could express yourself in a much franker and even fiercer way. Your passion to be true to yourself, because this event occurs in your own sign, but is also technically, in terms of universal central time, also in the first house, you're going to need to find your voice. And if you feel that someone you're closely involved with is not very supportive, not very observational about how much you support them or how much you put in, your dissatisfaction will need to come to the surface. But because Uranus and the North Node are forging a fabulous link with the Moon, Pluto, the Sun and Mercury, do you know, they kind of give you the permission to be really, really honest. And I actually think it could make a change in a very positive way. You know, sometimes if you have a frank discussion, it can clear the air. However much that might not be normally your approach, Pluto could push you to reveal something that's been simmering away inside of you for some while. So some resentment could come out. If you're in a more equal relationship and but the other person frustrates you because they see things very differently, maybe it's going to be a bit of a power battle that's going to go on for the next couple of weeks. So you're not coming into it feeling scorned so much, more annoyed at their approach to things, and you're maybe the one who wants them to hear your message. So interesting couple of weeks in prospect for you, Capricorn, which brings us to Aquarius. Now, of course, the sign of Capricorn is house 12 for you, which is as psychological as it gets. Pluto's been going there through that part of your situation since 2008. It's going to emerge next year, 13, briefly, into Aquarius, go back into Aquarius in 24, and that is the new epoch. For me, that is the official age of Aquarius beginning. So the moon here could be quite tricky. You may find that someone at work, because the Sun and Mercury, house 6, work, service, fitness, the physical domain, efficiencies, somebody at work who or you have to associate with, someone around you may not be as supportive as you would like. Unfortunately, house 12 is about secret enemies in traditional astrology. I think it's more about our fears or anxieties, the things that we don't necessarily want to embrace, like the shadow side. So making sure that your physical and emotional and spiritual health are working efficiently, holistically, is very important over the next couple of weeks, particularly with all that energy in the fourth house for you, Taurus, home, emotion, family, which is very unsettled still, and Saturn is in a square with Uranus. It's a bit broad at the moment, about 6 degrees, but it is going to tighten up as we go into August, and they're your two ruling planets. So at the moment, things feel a bit raw emotionally, but take extra care in terms of what you're eating, what time you go to bed, the amount of water you digest. You know, just be conscious of being as virtuous as possible. That's the 6th house, nurturing yourself, Cancer, and owning your vulnerabilities, not kind of seeing them as like, get off, you know, which air signs have a tremendous tendency to do. Me being a multiple Aquarius can really relate to this. So we have to sort of accept that, you know, we have got some vulnerabilities and fears and anxieties, and bring them into the camp, and, you know, take care of them. And that's the plan for the next 2 weeks. Now, Pisces, obviously the moon and Pluto for you are in house 11, friendships, the Sun and Mercury in the most playful part of your scope, the 5th house. Is there a friend or an involvement that you have where there tends to be quite a lot of, I wouldn't say it's like full-on manipulation, maybe a bit of guilt tripping, you know, a text message, I haven't heard from you for days, where have you been? And it's not everyone for West Bromwich isn't a guilt tripper. I must apologise if you're from anywhere west of Birmingham for that atrocious Black Country attempt. But if there is anybody in your world who tends to be pretty good at sort of making you feel bad because you're not including them somehow in your plans, that person could show up over the next couple of weeks, and it could really stick in your craw, because of course you can be very kind, very thoughtful and very inclusive, but you do have that square between your ruler Neptune and Venus, which suggests that your tendency to be very supportive, often of greatly lost causes, is not necessarily going to be to your advantage. So I think this full moon is basically saying use your time for the things that help you to express yourself, to have fun, but maybe in a romantic context it could be somebody to do with your distant past who's going to come back into your world, who may fancy you. I'm not saying it's an old relationship as such. It may be someone that you kind of knew, but maybe they're going to get in touch very unexpectedly through social media. Pluto reveals secrets. This could be a bit like a high priestess card, the revelation of the moon and Pluto in the 11th house. Some kind of connection could have some kind of interest in you, whether it's romantically or socially, and that's going to be very interesting. But you do have lots of bubbly energy in the 3rd house, so an opportunity to interact in a lively manner, but just to be aware that Neptune and Venus is very, very tender, so just be conscious of not letting anyone prey on your tendency to be really kind and helpful and supportive. Now, of course, you do have that other side to your nature, which can be completely detached and absolutely, utterly, diametrically opposite to the compassionate nature that astrologers say you have. And you do have Saturn in the 12th house in retrograde, which does sort of speak to that more detached side of your nature. And it is in a square with Uranus and the North Node. So equally, there could be something from your past that's still in your mind, circulating around your mind, that you needed to work with, but something quite cathartic around your social, romantic situation is possible, or some politics. It really depends on your unique circumstances. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be most grateful if you click that sub button if you've yet to do so. Take care and goodbye for now.